Well, yesterday was St. Patrick's Day, and our main man out in D.C., Chris Bedford, took the day off to celebrate, but he is back now. And first, we're going to make him unpack his day and tell us, Bedford, everything that you did yesterday and a little bit more on your recovery this morning.
It was a rough road this morning, a rocky road. I tell you, it turns out that I'm not quite as young as I used to be be able to handle 3 real dinners in a row that culminate in St. Patrick's Day. So the day begins bright and early, obviously, top of the morning to you. And I drop the boy off at school around 7:30. I pick up a pal at 7:45. We're back at my place to drop off the vehicle around 8:20 with an Irish coffee. Now, the first pub in Old Town Alexandria to open on St. Patrick's Day is Murphy's Grand Irish Pub, which is not quite so grand, but it certainly does the trick. Opens up at 9 a.m. with breakfast and pints, and me and about 80 other retirees, it seemed like. We were in the first wave on the beaches. We went from there down to O'Connell's around 11. Each place, of course, had live music. Met up some more friends there, so now there was 4 in our group. Ended up going across the street for a quick bite and then swung by. It was a bit of a hall pass day for us older married men. So swung by for a bite at our favorite sports pub before it was back to O'Connell's. And then, in an attempt to dig myself out of any trouble I'm probably already in with my family, I picked up their favorite pizza at Emmy Squared, had probably an ill-advised another cocktail there, and then went home to a big, happy St. Patrick's Day family before I woke up and for that early morning wake up, that early morning drop off in a pretty wretched state.
It's a rocky road to recovery as we get a little older. But I'm impressed and admire what you did. That's amazing. And I'm inspired, really. I'm going to have to ask for a pass next time. Looking forward to it.
I think you'll have to join us.
Did they actually have a proper breakfast?
Yes, the proper full Irish breakfast with tomatoes and the whole works.
Nice.
The beans were one of the most important aspects of getting you through that. And of course, nothing like the traditionally ethnically Irish meal of chips and curry, which of course is an important afternoon staple on a day like this.
Well, all right, let's get back to the business at hand. You are in D.C., and we're going to actually make you work a little bit today because we do see some big moves for MAGA out there right now. J.D. Vance is actually going to step in as the finance chair for the RNC. He's going to be the first VP to actually do this as the sitting vice president. So all of this is just to make sure that the America First agenda has the funding and the firepower that it needs. So what do you make of this move and just the future of the GOP and what this signals?
Gosh, it's smart. I mean, J.D. Vance is really remaking what you can do with a vice presidential role when you want to be, 1, a really intelligent workhorse, but 2, has the trust of your boss and the trust of the party. He could be a fundraising juggernaut. I think a lot of people look at him as someone who has a large role to play in the future of the MAGA movement and the future of the Republican Party. So him stepping into this role, and remember, the finance chair is not the CFO. He's not going to be sitting in there with Excel spreadsheets in an office and a calculator trying to do the numbers. Finance chair is going to be someone who's really responsible for how the party does in raising money. The Republican Party has re-entered kind of an old era of big money involved with it, which can be a blessing, but it can also be a curse. Money completely dried up from mega donors in 2016 when Donald Trump got the nomination. Basically Sheldon Adelson and then his widow were among the only ones left, and even they had real pushback against some of the ideas of a less interventionist foreign policy. And they were, with that money, they were able to have, and that influence and that support, and of course the voters, they were able to have an impact, I think, on Trump's foreign policy toward Israel and other parts of the Middle East. Now, that has changed. You've got Google, you've got Amazon, you've got the corporations for the first time in 8 years putting money back into this party, and you need someone who's got a little bit of star power to get there. And it sets him up for a future. He's pretty new to this game. He was a 2-year senator when he became vice president. So getting up that fundraising chops is going to be essential to his future as well.
Yeah, that's what I'm fascinated by. It seems to fit. It solves a number of different problems, right? I mean, the new money is going to come in. Who's going to control that? It's going to stay part of the MAGA agenda and channel the MAGA agenda or not. The RNC, needs a lot of work. But then that last part you mentioned is what's most fascinating to me. I mean, where else would you rather be, right? If you are the heir apparent, than the guy a few years from now who can point to the fact that he's raised all this money and overseen the raising of this money for the RNC. I mean, it seems like that's almost like the missing piece, and solidifies his hold and almost accelerates, right? That solidifying his role looking to the future.
And I think it's also important for the Republican National Committee in the first place. Now, I know that this is they raise a lot of money. I was close with the CFO for years. He's now down at the White House, right? So he's moved on from that position. But I've always asked him, I've always been kind of curious, where does this money come from? Mm-hmm. I understand people being really motivated to give money to different faces, to different candidates. They want to be small dollar donors or big dollar donors to people who make them excited. Donald Trump, for example, or if you lean more that way, maybe Kevin McCarthy back in the day, or whoever else. Mike Johnson is someone you want to donate to. That's a personality. It's a little bit harder to raise money for simply the Republican Party. The brand was in the toilet for years. It's an apparatus that doesn't have that actual personality that can persuade people and walk into a room. So to attach Vance to that party machine is extremely important and shows the remaking of the GOP at a pretty higher level.
Well, I want to ask you a question because we've been talking about the crooked judges, and Donald Trump has come out and said we need to get rid and impeach all of these crooked judges. And Daniel Horowitz, our guy, has written a piece for Blaze News saying if he actually wants to survive his presidency, Trump might need to defy these rogue judges. So what's your take on this? Because it is something that is just kind of in that news cycle, and it's not going away now.
I think they're going to have to do so rather carefully. I've got a piece coming out in the Beltway Brief tomorrow about how two of the biggest causes celebrated of the Democratic Party right now are a plane full of tattooed, hard-looking gangbangers and a woman who attended the leader of Hezbollah's funeral when she was visiting Lebanon and is an admirer of the Ayatollah and the Hezbollah, quote, martyrs. These are not very good heroes, but they're hinging these sorts of things on judicial intervention and the fights between the White House and the judges. I think you probably caught Stephen Miller's really interesting and contentious interview with CNN over the weekend or Monday, where he pushed back against these sorts of ideas. And what they're going to have to do is, opposed to saying, you've got the authority and we ignore it, they're going to have to make a strong case that they have no authority, that a judge saying turn this airplane around infringes so much on the legislatively gifted executive power that it's not even worth responding to. It's the same as if I wrote a column saying I ordered this plane turned around. Hey, it might be well written, but it's not going to have any actual authority over the president's decisions here. They're going to have to thread that needle very carefully because they don't have Amy Coney Barrett in the Supreme Court with them right now. And while traditionally the Chief Justice has been really deferential to executive power, he's been treading carefully. He hasn't gone in the direction that the Trump administration expected him to in earlier rulings. And he's a wild card that the Democrats seem to be betting on with this kind of wild overreach over executive power and the separation of branches. They seem to be relying on him as potentially their ace in the hole.
Well, Bedford, we know you have to run tonight, but we appreciate you putting in all of this effort to come back, even if you're not at 100%, because we know as we get older, that's a lot harder to do.
I've been laughing all day at Matt's comment that any nag can drink all night, but it takes a thoroughbred to get up again in the morning. And it's really motivated me, Matthew. So thank you.
All right, Bedford.
You're a professional.
We'll catch you tomorrow. But Matthew, before we go, I want to ask you, because I do see that we have comments from Chief Justice John Roberts today. He was issuing a statement saying that for more than 2 centuries, it's been established that impeachment is not only an appropriate response for the disagreement concerning the judicial decision, it's the normal appellate review process that exists for that purpose. And others, Mike Lee and others, are actually kind of shocked that Roberts would come out and make comments like this. Yeah,
so I think there's a couple things going on here. First off, I want to affirm what Chris said. I mean, in terms of why they have to be careful, right? So you have to be careful when you disobey the judge's orders because it matters a lot in the big picture. What is the judge saying about what thing the executive did? So if the executive is making a determination about national security, for instance, then going back, to over 2 centuries in America, the president is at his max powers. And generally, the Supreme Court has only come back and said, you did a bad thing, you did an oopsie, for instance, during a war. It takes after the war. Like after the thing has already happened, the court will come in and sort of mop up, but they give maximum deference to the executive when he's at a maximum, the kind of maximum of his powers, which would be especially when it comes to war and defense. That's why they're in a pretty good situation here. I think that the being leery about impeachment, though, I mean, notice what he says. It's in here, right? Impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. Well, yeah, that's true. But the question is the manner in which the decision is made, right? And if there is a number of things that you could look to say when this becomes egregious political conduct, and it's done in a way where it's clearly outside the bounds of what's normal, then I think there is a case for impeachment. So. He's not wrong in what he's saying. Of course, you shouldn't be impeaching judges because you don't like their decisions. That's not how the system works. But when you look at decisions that are overstepping the structural bounds of the judiciary, then all of a sudden you have a case. And so that is why you have to pick the right moment to do it. You have to find them at their most egregious. It's the worst kind of overreach, and then you come in for the kill there to have your best chance moving forward when you get to the Supreme Court.
But let's just look at the conversations that we're having today, right? This is a good conversation to have. This is a high-level intellectual conversation about how should we be going forward? Should these judges be impeached? Should they not? The conversation that we had yesterday with Mike Howell from the Oversight Project was talking about an auto pen with Joe Biden.
Yes.
Where do we know if the president of the United States was actually making decisions on his own? And now the conversation is like, okay, how are we actually going to go through and govern the country at a proper level in a proper way versus auto pen? So
in both these cases, they're similar. Roberts' response into impeachment is similar to the normie response to the auto pen. It's, oh no, this was signed. This makes me uncomfortable to talk about. Normally, you wouldn't go back and say that these things are invalid. The president signed them, and auto pen, I don't know, and they just kind of go off. They don't like it because it makes them uncomfortable, right? Because what needs to be proven is this is something outside the pale. This is not normal. There are rules. There are norms. Let's look at our rules and norms. And the rules and norms are not supposed to be that judges go way outside the bounds of their constitutional authority and overrule the president of the United States when it comes to sending dangerous terrorists, back to another country. That's the real norm. You could basically describe this as it makes them uncomfortable, right? Look, I don't want it to be the case that an auto pen was used in a way that is illicit and renders the statements of the president invalid, EOs or pardoning. That is awkward, right? But deal with it. We live in an awkward time, and that's a lot of that's the never Trump problem too, right? Oh, this makes me uncomfortable. We do things a certain way, and yada yada. But really, the certain way, the norm, is what you need to look at closely. What they really want to do is not be bothered, just like anyone else in their job, because it's going to be controversial and it's going to be uncomfortable for them. So what we need to stick to is the reality. When are the judges actually going way beyond the bounds of their constitutional authority and attack them for that and stick to it, just like Stephen Miller did on CNN? Please, Stephen, come on other networks that are actually friendly and reporting the news. That'd be great. And also when it comes to the auto pen, we don't want to get off this. If it's really the case that he was signing the pardons with an auto pen, we can't determine that he was in the right state of mind, then those are invalid, and it doesn't matter how uncomfortable it makes people in Washington, D.C.
The fact that we are actually having these conversations now, though, makes me so much happier than what we were dealing with Joe Biden as the president. I think we can all agree on that one.